I'm not an expert in the media, I have to say, and I hope that what I'm going to share with you today will be helpful because it's based on real experiences, some of which are good, some of them not so good with repercussions, and I hope that we will be able to learn together from them. I have to say, following on from Sandra, a lot of what we've done in the UK, we owe an awful lot to Sandra in terms of the help that she's given us in helping to prepare us to engage with the media. Why should we and how should we engage with the media? It can seem at one level very exciting, a great privilege to do, and then you get that phone call, can you come and talk on such and such? And I then go into panic mode, I have to say. Can I do it? Will I be a good representative? What about all the awful questions they're going to throw at me? How am I going to do it? Will it be an absolute disaster? And I would say, just very simply, that if there's one message coming out of what I'm saying today is obviously to undergird everything with prayer and to rely on God to help you, but then also to be ourselves. We can't be what somebody else is. And we have a lot of work to do, but actually there are real opportunities as well as the challenges. And I hope what I'm going to share with you today will actually help with that. I hope that it will spark questions that we can talk together, because that's obviously how we learn, and that you'll find this a very practical session. I'm sure all of us are very well aware of the importance of the media, whatever we think of it, in our culture and in our national lives. Now, obviously, we're from different countries, and so please forgive me that I'm going to be referring to our experience in the UK, but I think it's translatable from things that I've heard from other people as well. And so we know that whether we like it or not, the media plays a huge role in shaping our cultures, for good and for bad. There's been a growth, I think, in recent years, and particularly in very recent years, of the influence of the media on our lives and how we think and how we behave, and how certainly those outside of faith think and behave. There are various sorts of media, and I'm sure Sandra had covered these with you, but let's just think about some of them very quickly as an introduction. The press. In the UK, I think there is no doubt that the press shapes our culture. We live in a very different age now to how it was a few years ago, I think, and there is no doubt that within the UK, we know that, for example, politicians take note of what's in the media because it represents what people are thinking. We have one newspaper in the UK called the Daily Mail. Rightly or wrongly, it is viewed as the paper that women read. Now, probably some of our male politicians would say they're much too clever and great to read the Daily Mail, but they do read it. And they read it because it represents, they think, what women are thinking. And so they want to translate what they do so that they can relate to women. Some of the stuff, I have to say, in the Daily Mail is very favourable to us, so that's a good thing, but not everything is, obviously. So the press can shape our culture and how we think. If there are stories in the press, the culture makers, the policy makers think, well, that's an important issue. And so it is important to be there. Obviously, we can think of TV and radio. And TV probably is still incredibly influential. We live in the age, don't we? We say it quite often, of sound bites. You know, I long sometimes, why don't people get into things in depth and understand all the difficult issues and nuances? And people don't necessarily, but they remember the sound bite. It's a sound bite culture. And on television, you can see the person and you've got that relationship and the sound bite, and it's very immediate. And as Sandra said to us actually in the Politics Network yesterday, it's colourful, it's easy to see, and so it's very powerful. And within the UK, very often the TV will have perhaps, although it shouldn't, and I may be shot down for this, but a particular bias in some areas, in that there is sometimes an agenda that may be being pushed through, for example, storylines in soaps. There are two probably major issues at the moment in the UK. One relates to same-sex marriage and homosexuality. The other to do with end-of-life issues and physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia. And I can think of storylines in some of our soap operas, the soaps that everybody watches, that represent a particular point of view and make you sympathetic to a particular point of view, which may not be something that we want people to be sympathetic with. Well, we want them to be sympathetic, but we don't want them to be taking that line. And culture and thought is formed by that because it's very powerful. There's a flip side to that, which is good, which I'll come to a little bit later. And then, of course, social media. And I'm of an age where social media, I'm trying to get to grips with it, but social media is the immediate. It's not necessarily all of it thought through. And those of us who are involved in areas where we regularly use social media, you will know that something can become blown up into a huge issue very, very quickly. Sometimes, as I'll illustrate a little bit later on, with some quite damaging results. But it's there. And so how do we use it? How do we use it for good? What are the pitfalls? What should we do? All those things shape our culture, and certainly if we're talking about a younger generation, then that is something which is very, very, very powerful, and that's how they form their views. And so it is important, its growth and influence has grown, so why should we be engaged with it? Why don't we just say, well, it can be used badly, so we won't get involved? Well, I think that would be very dangerous. And anyway, we're whole people, aren't we? And there is good as well as bad. And, if you talk about social media, think of all the good things that come from social media in the way that we can communicate and build relationships and communities and so on. So the importance of engagement then, and I want to go back to 3 scriptures that I think sum it up for me personally. There's a lovely verse in Philippians chapter 2 and verse 15, which in the Message version of the New Testament is written like this. And I think this is the motto that we probably all have and certainly should have. And I daily pray that we'll live up to it. In the Message version it says, Paul says this, "Go into the world uncorrupted, a breath of fresh air in this sinful and polluted society. Provide people with a glimpse of good living and the living God." Isn't that a wonderful thought? A breath of fresh air. Wouldn't it be fantastic if on the media that breath of fresh air comes in and people get a glimpse of good living and the living God? And that's an opportunity that we all have. And then we know that we are called always to be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks the reason for the hope that is within us. We're called to do that. And we're also called in Colossians to take every thought captive for Christ. Take every thought captive for Christ. That means all those things that are out there in the media. Don't let them just get on. Let's take them captive for Christ. How we do that is the important thing, of course. And so how do we engage? Well, I want to suggest 1 or 2 headings, which perhaps we will unpack as we talk together and learn from each other's experience. But I'd like to refer to them in relation to the experiences that we've had. And the first thing I'd want to say is, how do we engage? We engage with wisdom And we need to be asking God for that wisdom. Journalists have very long memories. If we make a mistake, if we do something unwise, it will come back to haunt us. And it has come back to haunt us as an organisation. Let me give you some examples. In March 2008, one of our newspapers, The Independent, on Sunday, ran a story where the organisation that I work for, CARE, was strongly criticised. One of the really good things, almost one of the most exciting things that we do, is that we have a leadership programme for young graduates. And the vision is that we take probably between 15 or 20 young graduates each year who have real leadership potential. Leadership in the world. So leadership, people who are going to be able to, in future years, be members of Parliament, be working in the media, be working in academia, be in the Treasury, in the Foreign Office, in the diplomatic service, working at a very high level, but working with a biblical worldview. Incredibly exciting idea. We now have 2 MPs in the UK who went through the leadership programme. It's a programme where we take them as volunteers, and for 4 days a week they work as a volunteer with a member of Parliament or in the media or with a voluntary organisation. They work, if you take those who work in Parliament, they work for that MP. They're not allowed to lobby on our behalf. They're not allowed to take up our issues. They work for that MP. They're not paid. It's an educational programme. And they come together on a Friday for study, biblical worldview, and so on. And in 2008, we were involved in trying to influence our government on a bill that was going through Westminster, which had some very serious repercussions for embryology research, cloning, abortion, and so on. And we were taking a particular stand and educating our supporters and lobbying. Well, The Independent on Sunday ran a story accusing us of inappropriately lobbying MPs. And the story ran like this, that we were infiltrating Westminster with this sort of third division of young people who were going to subvert what was happening and exerting undue influence, and that by doing it, we were undermining our charitable status. Wow. The moment that story ran, charities in the UK are regulated by the Charity Commission, and they began an investigation. The investigation lasted for 2 years and took hours and hours and hours of work, which took us away from the work that we should really be doing. At the end of that investigation, this statement was made. The Commission has found no evidence to support the allegations that interns have been lobbying or that CARE, by virtue of the leadership programme, has been giving financial help to support MPs. Clear enough statement. No evidence. In 2011, The Guardian ran a story, and it all came up again. Exactly the same accusations. Hang on, hadn't the Charity Commission said there was no evidence? But because of another issue, they ran the story again. And then, in 2012, so we're very up to date now, the story ran again. This time with something else in it. And in the UK at the moment, as you may know, there is a bill going through Parliament to allow for same-sex marriage. And CARE, along with other Christian organisations, have been very active in campaigning against this. from the good of society point of view as well as from a Christian point of view. And again, the story was run that this right wing, in fact, cash-rich in inverted commas, I wish, but anyway, cash-rich evangelical organisation was inappropriately using its influence. And they had found out, because it was in the public domain, in 2009, we had given £700 to help a conference run to provide support for those who were trying to come out of a homosexual lifestyle. And immediately the gay cure issue came up. And they linked it to all those other allegations. So journalists have long memories, and one comment not thought through can come back to haunt you. So when that investigation and that story was running about the inappropriate behaviour, on a Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock almost, end of the week, I'm in a meeting outside of Care and my mobile goes. And it's one of my staff back at the office and said, "We have the Guardian on the phone. They're running a story. Can we answer these questions?" And up until that point, we had decided we weren't going to make any comment because it would give a story legs. Do you understand that expression? Make it grow? Friday afternoon, not in the office, we make a very simple statement. The first statement was fine. It was just a reiteration in one sentence about what the Charity Commission had said about us. But then there was another question. Oh, there was a question about how much we spent on the leadership programme, but we didn't answer that one. What is Care's view on reparative therapy for homosexuals in the church? And without really thinking, I said, well, if someone wants to come out of a lifestyle, surely they should be free to have that opportunity of help. Well, it was not a wise statement. It was true, absolutely true, and we'd stand by it. But it was taken and it was spun, and Care is in favour of. Do you know what then happened? 4 of the members of Parliament who take interns stopped taking interns and said they would never have another intern from Care again. Long memories. Not the best of wisdom on a Friday afternoon, but things that we can learn from it. And I think following on from that then, that means that we do need to have the courage in wisdom to say no. It's very flattering, isn't it, to have the press come to us or television to come to us and say, will you please talk to us about this? Wow, I'm going on television. I'm on the cameras now. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't be doing this, should I? It is really flattering. And, I couldn't, wow, well, you know what I'm saying, don't you? But we have to carefully think about what we're going. Is it a setup? A little while ago, a member of our staff, and he won't mind me saying this because he knows I'm going to say it, so please don't think I'm speaking behind his back. A member of our staff in Scotland was asked to go on television that weekend. He was asked to fill in for somebody who couldn't now take up the interview. It wasn't television, it was radio, I beg your pardon. He wasn't in the studio, he was on the end of the phone. And he was told that there would be somebody else in on the interview. What he didn't know was that the other person who was going to be in on the interview, because he hadn't asked, was the person who usually presents the programme, who we subsequently discovered was a very vocal member of the LGBT group in Scotland, and there was a guest presenter who came and did the interview. It was absolutely disastrous. It was the classic setup. And poor Gordon said in a way, the right things, but in the wrong context, with the wrong people, and we should never have allowed him to be in that situation. We should have said, and he didn't tell us he was doing it until afterwards and everything all happened. We should have the courage to say no. And so that was a very salutary lesson. I'm sure Sandra mentioned to you the danger of pre-recorded interviews. I can think of occasions when perhaps we've done interviews, they've been recorded, perhaps lasting for 40 minutes, and what do you get? A minute, if that, soundbite that comes taken totally out of context, and so damage is done. And so we have to think carefully about who's with us, what we're going to be asked to do, how we do it. So with wisdom, with preparation, you can never prepare enough. We have in the UK, and some of you may have heard of her, you may not have done, but we have a Member of Parliament, well, she's not a Member of Parliament now, but a very formidable, very feisty lady called Anne Widdecombe. If any of you watch, you probably don't get Strictly Come Dancing, but there is a programme on our television where this dance competition, and this rather plump 65-year-old or whatever lady who isn't, oh dear, I was going to say she's not hugely attractive, that's a terrible thing to say because she is, she's fantastic, was on the programme on Strictly Come Dancing. But I remember her, she comes over as so confident that she'd stand up in front of anybody and take them to task. I actually did a tour with her on one occasion when we were heckled like mad by the pro-choice lobby and we had police forces and goodness knows what outside the building. She loved it. She just rose to the challenge and took on all the hecklers. So confident. I read an article by her and she said, actually, I am very unsure of myself and I am only confident when I know what I'm talking about. And I found that incredibly helpful. So that we need to prepare. You can never do enough preparation. We need the research. We need to know who's on the media with us. And then we can fly. I was filmed a number of years ago now doing an Oxford Union debate with none other, you may not know the name, but a leading homosexual campaigner in the UK is a man called Peter Tatchell. And I did this Oxford Union, I must have been mad, but I did this Oxford Union debate with Peter Tatchell. I worked so hard in preparation for that because I was so nervous. But when I actually got up to speak, and it was being filmed, when I got up to speak, and there'd been all this heckling and all the questions interrupting, I was just so fired up about what was happening that I just left my notes and I went for it. But I couldn't have done that if I hadn't done all the work beforehand. We need, I think, as well, if we're going to work with the media, to have what I would call a crash plan. That we've got something in place in case it goes wrong. So what we do now, thinking of those examples I gave you at the beginning, we will have simple statements, if we know something is going to come up, simple statements worked out beforehand. That the moment something goes wrong, if you need to make a comment, you've got a simple statement, but you've also got the right people to make the comments. And that's something that's really important. Forms of training. I said prepare. Training is part of the preparation. You had lovely Sandra talking to you the other day. Sorry, Sandra, to keep picking on you. And Sandra did some media training with us. I have to say, we were all absolutely terrified before we started. But it was so helpful. So helpful. But you don't need to do that just once. You've got to keep on doing it. I've done media training in the past, but that session for me recently was really, really helpful. Keeping on doing it and with our staff. Having a clear message that we want to get across. The different sorts of media, you'll have different times. It may be a programme where you're sitting down one-to-one and you've got a long conversation live, and it's a chat show. That is very different from a 5-minute interview for the radio, or even for the television. The main points you want to make, and to stick to them, and to steer it round so that you and I get our messages across. I'm sure the example probably was given when you had Sandra's session about I love the analogy she used of the tennis court, and the going back and forwards. I think that's so really helpful. But then steering it in the direction that you want it to go. And you can do it. I've done interviews where perhaps we're talking about the issue of abortion. Very, very sensitive. And there will be women who are listening who've had abortions and who are suffering. How you say that and how you talk about it has to be very sensitive. And sometimes you will get the question, I've had the question thrown at me about, being uncaring and being, you're pro-life, you're not caring for people and et cetera, et cetera. And steering it round to the message that you want to say is really, really important. I've mentioned already knowing the audience. So vital. The importance of beginning, middle and end, so you're getting your message across. And then something that I think we need to stress, I talked about nerves. And I think probably everyone who goes onto the media or engages with the media is nervous. I have been surprised as I've got to know through my work some very public figures. But if you watch them before they speak, they can be a bundle of nerves. And then the adrenaline gets going. It's not that paralytic nervousness that you just can't do it, but that nervousness. But we need to be believable and to be ourselves. To have the evidence, to have the stories, good quality research that backs up what we do, but then just to be ourselves. I couldn't be an Anne Widdecombe. The way she speaks is quite strident, is quite hard. That's not how I am. But I can only be me. And hopefully the way I talk, or the way one of our staff talks, will be them. And that will come over. And that brings me to the next thing, with warmth. Tone is vital. Do you remember we said at the beginning that we need to give a reason for the hope that's in us? I think the end of that verse is as important as the beginning of the verse. Because Peter goes on to say, with gentleness and respect. To give a reason for a hope that's within us with gentleness and respect. When we're so fired up about something, are we actually respecting the person who has a different point of view, who we're trying to influence? I mentioned I did this film debate with Peter Tatchell. I hope that he felt I respected him for some of the very good things he'd done. And he had done really good things in relation to asylum seekers. We need to treat people with respect and with gentleness, to build relationships. It's all about relationships. Getting to know journalists. Finding the people who write in the way that affirms what we do. We had in the UK a lady called Melanie Felix, who is a journalist I met the Daily Mail I mentioned, on all of the issues probably that we're involved with. If we talk about marriage and the family, if we talk about the value of life from its beginning to its natural end, she very often writes in favour of the position we take. I found it quite difficult to build up a relationship with her, because you can't necessarily get to people very easily. But we began by, first of all, responding to something that she wrote that was really, really good, and had to send it via her newspaper to get to her. That relationship didn't happen overnight. It actually eventually started to happen because I happened to be at an event that she was at, and so was able to talk to her. And then we could do it following. There are a number of other journalists who I'll refer to it in a minute, but we do quite a lot of work in relation to how our tax system penalises married couples with children. That is, married couples where one parent, the mother, wants to stay at home and look after the child. And there are a couple of very, very expert journalists on those issues that our tax researchers have built up a relationship with. So they will constantly be coming backwards and forwards, stories being placed with them coming back and asking things from us. But that takes time. But to do it with warmth and with relationship. And then being clear with clarity. We've said it for the interview, being really clear what those points are, and practicing them and steering the argument. But we also need to be clear in our own minds what we're saying. I mentioned our tax consultants. Now, I'm not a tax expert. I mean, maths, leaves me out there. And they come up with this terribly detailed research, and I think, yes, great, looks really good. But anyway, we have a programme on Radio 4 on the BBC called Moneybox, which is a very special, it talks about all sorts of financial issues and the implications for families and for individuals and pensions and all that sort of stuff. Our tax experts were asked to go on that programme with, at least, let's put it this way, we were exploring going on that programme with our latest piece of research. It was a fantastic opportunity. It never came off. It never happened. And the reason it didn't happen was when the gentleman who presents the programme was talking to the tax researcher, he said, "I'm sorry, I know what you're saying, but this won't come over in my programme. People will not understand the points you're making in that way." And the opportunity was missed. So we need to be clear. We need to have the right people who are speaking. He obviously wasn't the right person to go on that programme. Brilliant, fantastic research, but he couldn't communicate it. So we need to be thinking very carefully, who are the people we're using? And so bringing on again with confidence. I am beginning to learn. I have to be reminded every now and then, but I'm beginning to learn that actually over the 40 years or so that CARE's been in operation, I haven't been around that long with them, I have to say, but over that period of time, we have built up a wealth of expertise. We've got masses of research, masses of stories. They are things which can play into the media. The journalist, the researcher, the interviewer hasn't got that experience. And so we can do it with confidence because we have it. The confidence, we must be careful, as I said already, that having that experience, we're not overconfident, that we don't just respond to the flattery, but that we do know who we are and we are distinctive. Giving a reason for the hope that is within us. We have the right, if I can use that sort of language, to make the points we want to make. We have the right to do it. And we have got such fantastic stories to tell, haven't we? Of God's grace and of things that have happened. So with confidence, because we can do that. With professionalism. That really goes back on all the things that I've been saying. But that professionalism will also mean that we've got to be available. I can think of occasions where a journalist has rung up and our press officers rang me and said, can we make a comment, can we do something? And I've just been too busy. And I said, oh no, we can't do that now. We'll do it. And we may not, but we may have missed a brilliant opportunity. We've got to be available if we're serious about engaging in the media. We've got to be Christlike. Full of truth, yes, but full of grace. And that gives us our boldness. And so just to sum up, and then we can have, I hope, some dialogue together. What are the opportunities? They are huge. We can be an influence for good. We can be. We can bring an alternative position. If all the message that's going out is from the secularists, the humanists, those with a very particular agenda, we have a different opinion and we have the right to bring it in the right way. We can build up the credibility of those we work with. Because if we do it well, they will come back to us again and again and again. And they will come to us for stories. And what we do has a credibility. We can build key contacts for the future. And who knows where they may lead. I think engaging with the media keeps us sharp. We can't just always think, well, we've always thought this and this is right and we just go along with it. We've got to be up to date. We've got to know what we're talking about. We've got to be steeped in Scripture. We've got to rely on the Holy Spirit. We can't just waft in and do it because we've done it hundreds of times before. And as an organisation that campaigns, we can obviously campaign much more effectively. But of course, as we've said, there are the challenges. There may well be unforeseen consequences. I mentioned the ongoing story. In fact, just before I came away, I have it here somewhere, but I won't wave it around, I received a copy of a letter that is beginning to circulate, which again lambasts care from the LGBT community. Strangely, in an area where we're working to relieve the suffering of women and children who are trafficked. But hey, this has come back into it. Okay, so finding the right training, avoiding the setup, taking note of the time constraints, being aware that people may be very friendly, but actually they may have another agenda. But above all, going back to what we said at the beginning, those opportunities, even though there are challenges, we can bring that breath of fresh air. So let's try. If we feel inadequate, well, there are people who can help us, and it's worth exploring. And people want stories. Well, we're in a unique opportunity and place to do that, aren't we? So that's us. Any questions? Any comments? Any wisdom? Definitely want some wisdom. Okay, the difficulty, you're saying, how do we do it? Because the difficulty of competing with other organisations who lobby and who have a very strong voice, yes? So how do we do it? There is no easy way to do it. I think it takes time. I think you have to build relationships with people and you have to give the politician what he or she needs. So you can look at the sort of interests and influence that they have, and we will back up any relationship with them with good quality research that they can use to support the arguments that they want to make, with short briefing papers. So again, if they're making a speech in Parliament, they've got some information there. We may, as you build a relationship, you may well end up writing speeches for them. Now, obviously, that will be particularly, usually, for Christian MPs who are working to bring a Christian voice in, but not always. So, to give you an example of where they're not Christian, but where there is sort of common cause, we're doing a lot of work at the moment to provide for the better protection of women and children who've been trafficked for sexual exploitation. As you can imagine, that can be a human rights issue, and there are MPs who wouldn't have a Christian faith, but who recognise the quality of the research that we've done over a period of time, and we've been working with them, giving them information for speeches they have. So they are very busy people. They will have lots of voices clamouring for their attention. And I think you have to pick carefully the people that you are going to work with and support them. And actually, on a positive side, I mean, that sounds a bit manipulative, which in a way it is, because we have an agenda, but we would say we are there to serve those people who have been elected, because that is part of the democratic process in the UK. We're called to respect those in authority over us and to pray for them. And very interestingly, when you do get to know MPs well, I can think of situations where we have said, would you like us to pray for you? And they've given us something to pray for them for. So there are lots of facets to it, but there is a sort of pragmatic thing. They want something from you, and we want to give it to them. But then there may be common cause. I mean, I mentioned the same-sex marriage issue. There is one particular MP in our Parliament at the moment who we have, with other Christian organisations, have worked with right through this campaign, in a very, very close way, writing speeches for him, lobbying, giving him resources, supporting him outside of Parliament, praying for him, getting updates from him. And that's a great two-way relationship. It doesn't always happen that way. And there will be some people you won't be able to have influence with. I can think of one MP that I went to see who there was no point of contact at all. It's the only time it's ever happened to me. But I came out and I picked up my phone and rang somebody because I just felt like bursting into tears. There was no common cause at all. Now, I don't know what will happen in the future, but that is rare, actually. Yes, the question was, I mentioned giving a quick response on a Friday afternoon and it was wrong. What would be the right way? I think the right way would be to think about it very carefully before you did it, not to make that, do you know the phrase knee-jerk reaction? Not to make a quick reaction without having thought it through. The motive was good. We felt we didn't want to just say no comment because there'd been lots of no comments and it wasn't looking terribly good, but we hadn't thought through what we were going to say. And I think at that point, we shouldn't have commented on that. We could refer to the simple statement about what the Charity Commission had said and left it at that. I don't know if you, Sandra, if you want to come in on that, but I felt that we really hadn't thought about it because there was so much else going on. Yes, I didn't say a lot about social media, and so thank you for the question. The question was, how have we leveraged social media for our cause or protected ourselves? I think we've used blogging very well. A growing number. It's a good place to comment, to put forward a particular point of view, to have time to think about it a bit before you do it. With regard to Twitter, we have selected people who will make comments, and we may not make comments on particularly sensitive issues unless we've really thought about it very carefully. Rightly or wrongly, I mean, the other thing that happened as a result of this story about about care and the leadership programme was that there was a huge social media storm about it, huge. And for a short period of time, it looked as if absolutely everything was imploding because, these terrible things were being written and we were, I actually discovered I lead a fascist organisation. I didn't actually realise that, but that was, and rightly or wrongly, because I had been tweeting at that stage, I decided for a period of time I wouldn't, because I felt I was open to something that was, so I think you just need wisdom. And we say, for example, if those who are tweeting on our behalf, we always have we have two people looking at it, so it's not one person just firing off something, and it's but there are real opportunities because you're out there, you're seen, you're known, the downside is you can get yourself into a lot of hot water. The other thing, of course, which is quite useful is retweeting stuff. And we actually had a tremendous experience last week, I think, where there is a famous, there's a famous blogger in the UK called Cranmer. And if ever you follow him, I mean, he writes some really good stuff. If it is a he, I'm assuming it is. We actually sent him a document that we had produced, sort of debunking some of the myths of what the government had been saying about the safeguards around the legislation that they're proposing on same-sex marriage. He actually included virtually the whole document, and that was sent out on social media to whoever. So I think that was a good thing. But we're learning. I think what I say is we are quite new at it, and I think we have got a lot to learn still, to be honest. But it is an opportunity. The question was how, when there are stories that are damaging, how should we react? Should we, or should we be quiet, or should we say something? Should we write something? It's a difficult one to answer, actually, because I think you have to decide for yourself in a particular situation, because all circumstances will be different with other factors that influence. One thing I would say that I think is probably a general principle is don't get one person just deciding what they do. Have other people, a sort of corporate decision and seeking wisdom from other people. So, for example, when the media storm hit the first article that I referred to, I went to our trustees and we had a discussion about, do we respond at this point in time? Do we just leave it? And we decided that while the Charity Commission investigation was going on, we wouldn't make a statement and it would die. There was another occasion with one of the other articles when we did make a simple statement, not one that could be questioned but just a couple of sentences that made the point because the information had been wrong. And I think you have to decide. I'm not really answering your question, when do you speak and when you don't, but I think it needs careful thought. And even if you think about it and you take advice, you may get it wrong. I don't know if anybody else has got any wisdom. Sandra, would you have any wisdom for us on that about from a journalist's point of view or from a press point? Should we keep quiet? Should we? Is it each on its merit? Sort of looking at it. The question was, once the story's out there, you can't actually do anything about it. I think if there is something that is really, really untrue, that is going to have a damaging effect, even if it may not be particularly taken notice of, there may be a case for just having a simple statement that you can refer to, because you can in fact refer back to that was printed, But yes, you're right, once the story's out. Although people do, I said journalists have long memories. I mean, people actually do have quite short memories. You can think, I know when all the social media storm was going on, sort of 18 months ago, and at times it got me down, but it didn't really get me down, I have to say. It actually made me laugh at times because it was just so ridiculous. But it got some of our younger members of staff down who were in the thick of it, because they'd not been through situations like that before. And we had to manage that very carefully with them, because to them, it seemed as if the whole world was falling apart and we were going to be in a terrible position. And, so